Hi, I'm Marc Kantor, and thank you for joining me for Recovery Talk, where guests tell the story behind the story. Today, I'm joined by Rachel Graham, the CEO and co-founder of Healing Springs Ranch, a residential treatment center in Tioga, Texas, outside of Dallas, the CEO and co-founder of Evolve in Transformation, which helps clients find their true meaning and purpose, TEDx speaker, and Rachel has shared her story around the world, and I'm delighted to have you here today. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's good to see you again. Appreciate it.
Good to see you again. So last night, as I mentioned, I started to do some research. I watched your TEDx talk twice in a row. And
sleep?
No, actually, I watched it while I was making dinner, so it was perfect. I kind of just leaned the phone up against, and I was doing my chopping, which is very therapeutic and all that
Good.
stuff. I watched it twice because I was really impacted by the conversation you had with the young man on the plane, and when you turned to him and you asked him who hurt you, that just to me was like, yeah, I felt that. I really felt that, and I'm wondering if you would share a little bit of that story, because I have some questions about it.
Yeah. So the premise of that story was just simply, being on an airplane, being open to making a connection with someone that I sensed was struggling with something. And as we started talking, and I really just invited him to a conversation in a almost hit you in the face kind of way, like you just did. It was a very direct approach, but you know what I did? I knew I had only an hour and 20 minutes on that flight with this man, and I knew something was bothering him. I didn't know what it was. And so I felt like by just cutting to the chase, he's either going to bite on that, or he's going to tell me to mind my own business, and I'll turn and put my headphones back in. But I'm glad I did. I'm glad I took that approach and that really direct invitation to open up and understand what was going on. Because had I not done that, I'm not sure how that story would have played out.
Right. I'm just curious, how old was this person? About
mid 40s, probably somewhere in that range. I don't know that I would have picked up on it if I hadn't seen the energy. And I mentioned that in the TEDx, where he was shifting and he was getting on the plane, and I could feel that energy. As someone who's pretty sensitive to other people's energies, yeah, it just to me was like, oh, please don't sit next to me, and then he does, and I'm like, okay, there's something going on. And I think the biggest message in that story for your viewers that go watch the TEDx is, because it's a really powerful story, it's a true story, and I think the biggest message in that is we miss the opportunity to have an impact on each other. I mean, he had an impact on me too. First of all, he taught me not to be so judgmental. I was already making up stories in my head about, if he sits next to me, all that energy is gonna bleed into me. Then I'm gonna be anxious, and I'm going to see my mom who's dying. I'm gonna bring that anxiousness into her house. I started playing out this story in my head.
Right.
So that's the biggest thing I think that he taught me, was that it's okay, and to go with your gut and to ask the direct questions, and if you offend someone, apologize and turn back and mind your own business.
Yeah, but just to give people who are watching this a little more context, this young man said that he was on meth, which you could kind of tell based on your experience working with addicts, and that he said he was going to New Orleans for a blowout party, and then after that he was going to take his own life.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a pretty heavy thing to say to somebody. And then when he tells you this, you go right to the trauma aspect of addiction, which is a huge part of it. And you say to him, who hurt you? And he reveals to you.
Yeah, he reveals to me that he was molested as a young boy by clergy. And so he had never told anyone that. He was so ashamed of it. And it wasn't until he started opening up about that and crying, on the plane, and The flight attendants were looking at us like, what is going on there? And all I could do was just hug this complete stranger. That's all I knew to do, because you could tell how painful the wound was still very, very fresh in his mind, even though he was probably 30 years past the event. It was still there and still haunting him, which is why he said he could not figure out why he could not get clean. He had been to treatment, and the reality of it is I had an opportunity to share with him. I mean, I asked you this question because I know what's underneath drug use and alcoholism and any kind of compulsive or addictive pattern. There's some sort of pain. And so it was an invitation. He took it, and then we talked about it, and it was a surreal moment, and I think when I drew the correlation for him that he has a choice to stay alive, and I was going to go visit my mom who's dying of pancreatic cancer, and that she didn't have a choice, and she would give anything to be in his shoes, trauma and all. And it's not that I was minimizing his trauma or his decision to on ways to handle kind of the trauma, but I wanted to give him hope that you can live through this. And that's when I shared the 1 in 6 information, that 1 in 6 men is sexually molested, and it's the darkest secret in our world right now. No one talks about it. And it's unfortunate for men and young men that it is shameful, or they believe it's shameful to open up to other men or to other people about it. Because it is so common. And I see that every day when a young man will open up and say, I was molested. I'm probably the only person that's ever happened to. And it's like he's sitting in a group with a bunch of other people that have a similar, but yet a slightly different story,
Yeah, we tend to think that, I remember when I was in treatment, we kind of went around and, everybody had their turn at a certain point in treatment to tell their deep, dark secrets and, kind of like the consequences. And I did, and I kind of like mumbled through mine because I think I'm the only one, right? And it turns out, the rest of the group is like, okay, me too. So then you get off the plane and you see this man go to the counter, the airline counter, and he says to you, you said, what are you doing? He says, I'm going back to Dallas. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Had you ever heard from him again? Have you ever?
I gave him my card. I hoped I would have, but when he went to that ticket counter and I walked up to him, because at this point I'm at a point where I either need to notify the authorities if I feel like he's really going to be a threat to himself or somebody else. And I see him at the counter, and that's when he said, he was going back to Dallas. He had changed his mind, and that's when we have that exchange of, I wasn't supposed to have been in that seat. I got upgraded the last minute, and that's when he said, neither was I. And that's when it hit me how powerful that interaction was. I mean, the whole hour and 20 minutes was probably one of the most poignant hour and 20 minutes I've ever spent with a stranger. And to think that this man had already gone through and cycled through his head his abuse, the addiction, the connection of the abuse to the addiction, the fact that it's not a life sentence, that he doesn't have to give up his life to escape the pain, that there's hope, there's ways he can do that. Yeah. And so it was just profound. And like I said, he gave me a great gift too. And so it was two strangers that kind of really marked, put a very, very powerful message inside the other person, a gift that each and only each one of us could give the other. If that makes sense.
And that's amazing. And that to me, in my experience in recovery, and as a recovering addict and somebody who works in the field, is just these God talking to us through other people is just amazing. We get what we need. So I hope and pray that he has found his way and is out there still fighting the fight or on the other side of it. So you prior to getting into the treatment and recovery business, you were a pretty successful executive.
I was in the managed care space, on the other side of the playing field from where I am now as the provider. So yes, I switched teams and came across the provider side. But I worked together with some business partners, and we had a healthcare analytics company that we ultimately sold to a larger company, and I ended up running their acquisition businesses until I hit probably I would call it executive burnout, having gone through a transaction which in and of itself is exhausting, and then going straight into some pretty heavy lifting jobs and roles within the parent company while still running my business. I hit a spot and really needed to exercise some self-care.
Yeah.
I think if I had a drug of choice or a behavior of choice, it's workaholism. I can easily fall into that. And as we all know, process addictions or compulsive behaviors are a way of escaping things. And I didn't know what I was escaping at the time. It then eventually revealed itself, I think.
And that's kind of the dream, right? You start a company, you build a company, and then you sell it to a bigger company, you cash out. So you've gone from a successful business executive to running a treatment center, and a totally different thing. And you're not a recovering addict yourself. Most people in the business are. I find about 80% of the women in the business are, but if they're not, they have a dad or a spouse or a son, and then mostly all the men are. But you went from being a successful executive to running this treatment center. What was that? What's the journey between those two spaces?
Yeah, it really comes down to, I think anyone that's in our industry, Mark, is someone that's been impacted by addiction, compulsive behaviors in some way, whether it was you or a family member or multi-generational patterns. We all kind of just end up here because we feel called to come into this world because we get it. We get it in a way that maybe you don't get it if you've not experienced that. And I don't think anybody, when they're young, when they say, what do you want to be when you grow up? In your case, I want to be an interventionist and help people get treatment. Or mine, I want to have a facility that people come and get treatment for addiction. You don't even have the concept of that, until you actually.
You don't even know what that is.
Yeah. So, we come into this, and I think because we're compassionate people, we are, we recognize that we all are a little bit broken in ways, and it's about healing those breaks, and not letting that define you in a negative way. And so I came into this through a family member, and I didn't know anything about addiction. And one of the things that I am really passionate about in this industry is it wasn't until I actually needed help that I had to scramble and figure out how to find help. And I didn't know what's good help, what's not, with the situation we were dealing with. I didn't even know where to begin. And I'm a relatively intelligent lady, and to think that I don't know where to start to get my loved one help and to recognize what they really need and who to even ask, what do they need for this?
Right.
And process addictions, and in this case, he struggled with a process addiction. Process addictions have only really come about in the last decade or so, where we actually are recognizing that whether it's a substance or a process that someone's compulsively doing, the origin of it is the same. It's pain, and it's a way to really manage the pain that they're trying to escape from. And most of us as humans, until you get into this industry, don't understand that the addiction is really a symptom and it's not the real problem. And so historically, people would try to treat the symptoms. And if you weren't successful in treating the symptoms, or if you relapsed or slipped or whatever, it was a punitive thing. And now we're learning that you have to get to the origin of this, and it's going to be a lifelong thing, in that you're learning how to have healthier coping mechanisms and not resort to these negative or adverse coping mechanisms that once served you in some fashion or form.
And you mentioned, in one of the videos I was watching yesterday, the concept of bad behavior versus bad person, feeling guilt and feeling shame.
Mm-hmm.
Which is as you explained, is the guilt being I feel bad about my behavior, and guilt, shame feeling I feel bad about who I am.
Right.
And so and then on your Evolve and Transform website, it says difficult events are meant to pave the way to amazing transformation. And so you're going along, and you kind of have this great life, and then you discover someone you love is struggling with addiction, and there are all kinds of consequences associated with that, financial and emotional and all that. And then you tell the story about you come home, and you get a call from your kid's nanny, and they say, you got to get home, the house is flooding. I mean, this is all happening within a 24-hour period.
It was crazy. It was crazy. And you know, when I look back and I analyze what happened in that period, I think, you know, I was so busy working, and I probably missed a lot of the things happening around me.
Mhm.
And this was almost like God's way of slowing me down, saying, "Wake up.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you something, and you're going to,
Jesus.
yeah, and it's going to be in bright lights and hit you right upside the head with a 2x4. You know, it couldn't be, you know, with my personality type, it probably needed to be that to get me to go, oh, wait a minute, there's a lesson to learn in all of this. And then to also teach me how to surrender and let go and let the lesson reveal itself to me.
Mm.
Because as a type A career woman, you know, we want to drive and we want to drive results, right?
Right.
That's what we're programmed to do. And in this case, I wasn't in the driver's seat, and I'm not sure that I'll ever get all the way through the journey, you know, that I'm still going to be driving for the rest of my life on that path, and I'm having amazing stops along the way. And so I had to stop thinking of it in terms of I need to get from here into here as if it's a finite place, you know? And
Yeah.
that's when I surrendered.
And you know, I'm about coming up on 16 years into my journey, and yeah, thank God. And but it's still more is being revealed to me all the time. You know, um, it's only within the last couple of years that not that I've recognized my childhood trauma, but allowed myself to make the connection between my disease and my childhood trauma. And because I always said no, I knew it was there, but I always said no, it's just an excuse for weakness. If you just tried harder, it would be okay. But I finally, after so many years of coming to understand that you know, it was never going to be okay. I was screwed before I, you know, could walk. It was just there, you know. So you have this event, and you know, and you shared with me when we were at the coffee shop how you look down in the flooded water, and you tell me what you need me to see.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I
I was
did.
that was amazing to me when you said that. I was just wow.
It was to date probably the most spiritual moment I had with God, where I actually felt the presence
Mhm.
of a higher power that was trying to teach me a lesson, not a lesson in a negative way, trying to teach me something that I was supposed to then take and do something else with, is maybe the better way to say that. And I couldn't be where I am today had I not gone through that journey. And so that journey is actually something I'm very grateful for now. At the time, I could have never told you that, and I was angry and upset and feeling like you said, and I was in a cesspool of emotions. Didn't really know how to handle things, and even my loved one, and I mentioned this in the TedX deal, is, you know, been trying to make amends for many years, and I finally just said to him, I said, if you're doing this for your program, then great, but if you're doing it because you think I need it, you're off the hook. You gave me the most incredible gift another human being could give one, you know, someone else.
And people that are not in our field or not, you know, in the realm of self-exploration and things like that, and are kind of, uh, you know, keen to these things, the idea that the worst moment of your life, or one of the worst moments of your life, really would, you know, that if not for that moment, I
Mm-hmm.
would not be here today, and I'm so grateful for that. I mean, that sounds crazy. It's like when people come into program and they hear other people say, I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic, and they're like, how could you possibly be grateful for such a thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But you do. Yeah, I mean, without that, you know, I think of my life as I would have gone for years just kind of circling the drain, bumping along the bottom, but because of this event, because of, you know, really falling on my face, I really had to take a look at it. And my life is so much better now than it ever could have been, just bopping along. So you have this event, and then you find, you decide you want to open a treatment center. You want to, how did you find Healing Springs Ranch? Did it exist? Was it, what was it?
Well, in that dark moment, this is kind of something that I kind of chalk it up to the fact that I'm an entrepreneurial girl. What I did when I was in those dark moments, I went and procured the LLC, Evolve and Transform LLC, and the domain. And I couldn't get evolveandtransform.com. So I was like, what's the next best, domain name? And I got evolveandtransform.me. Right. That was what was available. And so that's why it's .me. And I thought, this is perfect. This is totally perfect. And so I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed hope, inspiration. I need to put something out there to kind of help me strive for something else. And so I did that. And as I started going along, I started meeting some amazing folks in the industry as I was working on my own healing journey, which a lot of people don't take the time to do their own work when you're in a situation where you have someone struggling close to you with addictive and compulsive behaviors. And so I started that journey. And so I knew I wanted to get in the field. I knew it was opening up for something, but I wasn't sure what exactly. And then one of my, at the time, friends came to me with some other folks, and everyone was kind of talking about, what if we go this path and we open up a treatment facility that really focuses on the underlying issues? And so we started putting together the business plan that really we wanted to change. I didn't want to enter this industry to be like everybody else. I wanted to enter it and do something different. And I wanted to do something to help the families like mine, so that no other family is impacted in the way that mine was, because there was so much through that journey with my family, things that happened I can't even begin to go into, but it was so egregious. And it was at the treatment facility's hands, in my opinion, that was responsible for that. And it was not helpful at all to my loved one or to my children in this situation. So we banded together and we said, look, let's prevent this from happening. And how can we do that? And we had some of us came from the clinical world, some of us came from the business world, some came from different journeys, but we've all been impacted by this. And so we said, okay, what would that look like? What would it need to look like to be different? And so then this 50-acre property wasn't even on the market, or was going on the market. And so one of the business partners at the time got a phone call and said, hey, you want to look at this? And so she did. And it was dilapidated. To see it on the website now on the Healing Springs Ranch. Thank you. You've seen it. You've been there.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm going to put a link to Healing Springs in the comments. So.
Great. If you had seen it then, you would have been like, you have lost your ever-loving mind. It was overgrown, needed lots of repairs. And when you start construction, you pull out a wall and you realize there's 58 more problems. Right. So it was quite the production to get to where it was. And eventually in July of 2016, we got our licensure and we got our first client at the beginning of August. And to this day, our first two clients, they call each other Thing 1 and Thing 2. So if they're watching out there, we love it. We still refer. They were like, we're Thing 1 and Thing 2. We're the first two at the treatment facility. And that's what we've done. And we've grown and we're expanding our reach to help people with just healthy lifestyle and healthy communication through the LifeWorks program. So we're doing a number of different things to advance the ball, not just people that are struggling with addiction, but people that really just didn't learn some of these life lessons on healthy communication, how to resolve differences, how to process anger, how to feel your feelings, because those are at the core everything we teach in our program at Healing Springs Ranch. It's just, for the folks that come there, they have to have a diagnosis to get in, but then we teach them life skills. And the family members were the ones that pointed that out. They said, everybody needs this, not just your clients. Sure. Yeah. We need it, get it out there. So that's what we did. We're putting it, we're actually in the process of moving into LifeWorks Wellness and doing that piece.
No, that's good. And, you mentioned this in one of your videos, and kind of the differentiator between Hope Springs and another treatment center is really the focus on that trauma and that family piece. And you mentioned in one of your videos that if you, and this is a big part of what I do too, is that when you have a family member that's in treatment, especially part of your nuclear family, you have a responsibility too. It's not just, a lot of people, I find when I do interventions or I talk to families, I say, really, it's about 80% family, 20% the addict, because I'm not meeting the addict till the morning they walk into the intervention, but I'll
Mhm.
spend 2 weeks talking to a family, and it really a lot of it, they've got to do the work. I mean, recovery in a family happens systemically, or but not in a silo.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. And that's why, everybody, if you haven't experienced it yet, you will at some point in your life. Somebody that's struggling. It's either going to be you or someone you're close to, someone you know. And what I personally, this has kind of been my personal crusade, is I want to educate people that how the origin of the addiction, so that people have more compassion around someone struggling instead of judgment and punitive measures, that they understand that if it were that easy to put the bottle down, someone would have already done that.
Right.
And if it were that easy to have a healthy relationship with food, they would have already done that. And I heard the best story, and I've heard the parable, I guess you call it a parable, before, but one of my alums said this yesterday. We were looking at something he did, and he said, if you put a frog in boiling water, it's going to jump out. But if you put a frog in water and you turn up the temperature 1 degree at a time, it's going to die, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really what happens. People don't understand, 1 beer becomes 10 beers, becomes, a fifth of vodka, becomes whatever. Or one joint leads ultimately to heroin, or one pain pill after a surgery leads you to, a full-blown hydro or oxy addiction. So that's what people don't realize. It happens gradually over time. It's not just someone jumped in and said, I want to be an addict. Now there are some drugs that grip you fast, faster than others. But no one really sets out to say that. They just know that when I do this thing or consume this thing, I feel better. I feel relief, if just for a moment. And then, as you got to keep dialing it up and dialing up the mounts and
it takes more and more to the same effect. And well, as the book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, it is a subtle foe. It is a very, it's a very subtle disease. It's a very patient disease too. I mean, it waits.
Yeah. I know people that are 16 years in recovery that, have a big life shift and found themselves on very shaky ground. The beautiful part of it is that they used the tools that they had been given. And one of the things that I try to encourage family members to do is to not get so punitive if someone slips. You think about riding a bike. You get up on that bike and you fall, and then you get back up and you might fall, but not as many times. It's a process. And to me, when and if someone has a slip, and that slip is only in the duration of hours versus years, what it would have been, a complete full-on relapse for many years and spiraling down the rabbit hole, but it's hours, they made a bad choice, and they call you and say, I made a bad choice, I had a drink at an event, or whatever it might be. That's a win. And people don't see it that way sometimes in our industry. That is a win, because they realize, okay, I got to dangerous waters. I'm getting myself out, and I'm asking someone throw me a lifeline. Help me out here.
The awareness, so they have awareness. And I think one of the differentiators in recovery is that when something is kept as a secret as opposed to exposed. So there's a big difference between somebody having a drink and not telling anybody and say, I screwed up, I had a drink. And, but I love there's a meme that goes around on social media and says, if being hard on yourself or beating yourself up worked, it would have worked by now.
Right.
So, so.
That's true. That's very, very true.
Yeah. So, well, this has been great. I feel like I could talk to you forever. This is great. I mean, you're doing fantastic work. And yes, I did come and visit Hope Springs Ranch, and I loved being there. I mean, the food was great. There is an incredible. I'm sorry, Healing Springs Ranch. My bad. Apologize. There's such a feeling of recovery and serenity there, and I mean, you've come a long way, and you've helped a lot of people.
Thank you. No, I'm so proud of the team at Healing Springs Ranch, and you're going to see some really cool, innovative things. Like I said, we didn't enter into this race to be an also ran. And so we want to be we're going to set the pace in this industry. And so I'm challenging this whole industry to raise their game and look at the type of treatment that you're providing, look at whether, at the efficacy of that treatment, and start top grading yourself to keep delivering better quality treatment. And the next one is dealing with the insurance companies. The insurance companies need to recognize that this is like anything else. We pay for diabetes, we pay for other disease states.
Right.
Why aren't we paying for this? And I get, people say, well, some people are chronic relapsers. Okay, well, maybe you put some boundaries around it. We'll pay for treatment for this period of time, but if you exhaust this, you exhaust it. Right. So I think there's a way to make that win for both parties, but I think it's a bigger conversation that we need to have out there.
It's a big conversation. Yeah. Right. I mean, it's kind of like the insurance companies do with fertility treatments. We allot you a certain amount, and once you exhaust that's
right.
kind of it. Yeah, it's a good point. So
yeah.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this, and keep doing what you're doing, and so thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I will, hopefully we'll get this out to some people and they'll see it and it'll do some good. So
cool. Tag me on LinkedIn because I've been watching your stuff, so it'll be fun.
Good. I will for sure. Have a great day and thanks again.
Okay, you too. Okay, bye, Mark.
Bye-bye.
Bye.